Well, good morning and welcome on this Marathon Sunday at the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. It is Sunday, May 5th, 2024. The Baltimore Orioles have the best record in the American League. This is a service about hope and uncertainty, so there we go. We're done. That's it. We can just go home. My name is the Reverend Dr. Oscar Sinclair. It is a pleasure to be here this morning. I'm joined by Andy, our worship associate, by Bill, our musician, by all the people that make this service possible, by all of you who have braved the marathon today, by all of you on the live stream who have taken the wiser choice, perhaps, and avoided the numerous road closures. Our vision as the Unitarian Church of Lincoln is that we aspire to be a loving community, uniting reason with spiritual exploration to transform ourselves and the world. That continues to be a big dream, but one that has carried us through economic uncertainty, pandemic, climate change, and difficult times in the state of Nebraska. This morning, we gather in community, what Reverend Ken Patton called this cradle for our dreams and workshop for our common endeavors. We dream big at UCL, and then we work to bring those dreams into the world because we know that we are capable of doing big things together. The world needs transformation. It needs love. And when we gather together, we bring our spirits and our reason to that task. May our time together be a homecoming and a chance to dream. Welcome, and let us begin.
We light this chalice in a moment of spring, dwelling in its sunshine and storms, acknowledging burgeoning growth and chaos together as we watch thistles grow beside tulips. And we'll be singing 113 in the Gray Hymnal, Where is Our Holy Church?
If anyone would like to come forward for this story, you're welcome to do so now. Logan and Mira. Our story is called When the Wind Stops by Charlotte Zolotow. The great bright yellow sun had shone all day, and now the sun was coming and now the day was coming to an end. The light in the sky changed from blue to pink to a strange, dusky purple, and the sun sank lower into the long, glowing clouds. The little girl was sorry to see the day end. She and her friend had played in the garden, and when they were tired of playing, they lay down in the grass and felt the sun on them, warm and soft, like a sleeping cat resting. There had been icy lemonade in the afternoon, which they drank under the pear tree, and the little girl's mother read her a story on the porch before she went to bed. And now her mother came to say goodnight, and as she leaned over to kiss her goodnight, the little girl asked her, "Why does the day have to end?" "Why, so night can begin. Look." And she pointed out the window where, high in the darkening sky, behind the branches of the pear tree, the little girl could see a pale sliver of the moon. "That's the night beginning, the night with the moon and stars and darkness for you to dream in." "But where does the sun go when the day ends?" "Well, the day doesn't end, it begins somewhere else. The sun will be shining there when night begins. Nothing ends." "Nothing?" "Nothing. It begins in another place or in a different way." The little girl lay in bed and her mother sat beside her. "Where does the wind go when it stops?" "The wind blows away to make the trees dance somewhere else." "Where does the dandelion fluff go when it blows away?" "Carries the seed of new dandelions to someone's lawn." "What about rain? Where does the rain go when a storm is over?" "Well, the rain goes into clouds to make other storms." "And where do clouds go when they move across the sky?" "To make shade somewhere else." "And the leaves in the forest, when they turn color and fall?" "Into the ground to become part of new trees with new leaves." "But when the leaves fall, that's the end of something. It's the end of autumn." "Yes, the end of autumn is when the winter begins." "And the end of winter?" "Well, the end of winter, when the snow melts and the birds come back, is the beginning of spring." The little girl smiled. "It really does go on and on. Nothing ends." The little girl and her mother looked out at the sky. The sun was gone completely and the lovely pink clouds had disappeared. The sky was dark and purple black. High above the branches of the pear tree shone, clearly now, a thin new moon. "Today is over. It's time for sleep now. And tomorrow morning when you wake, the moon will be beginning a night far away, and the sun will be here to begin a new day." And that is how the story ends, with a new day. And the children are dismissed to their classes, and we'll have guest musician, I believe, on video.
Good morning. I'm Kim Zeman, President of the Board of Trustees. I wanted to offer a special welcome to those of you who are visiting for the first time. I have a few announcements to share as our church community extends beyond Sunday morning worship. Today, after service, you can grab a cup of coffee and then come back in here for a workshop on trusts and wills. Following the workshop, we will open the floor for questions and answers about setting up wills and trusts. 2 weeks from today, we will hold our first of 2 town halls on Sunday, May 19th. Town halls are your opportunity to meet board candidates and ask questions about items on the agenda for the spring congregational meeting on Sunday, June 2nd. As an update on the interim search process, we have 4 highly qualified candidates who have applied to be interims at our church. We are in the process of checking references and doing interviews.
So each time we gather on Sunday morning, we set aside a portion of our service to recognize the joys and the sorrows that we carry into this time and space together. We do this because sorrow is a little bit easier to bear when we bring it to community, and joy is easier to celebrate. So, at this time, I'd like you to name either your name or the name of somebody that you are carrying in sorrow this morning, or type into the live chat if you are joining us there. Who are we carrying in sorrow? Andrew.
Aunt Janet.
Aunt Janet.
Carol.
Carol.
Rick Granholm.
Rick Grandholm.
Jala.
Jala.
The Dement family.
The Dement family.
Coralie.
Oralee. Erica.
The people of Palestine.
The people of Palestine. In the live chat, there are sorrows for Linda, for Oralee Ferguson, for Rashida and her faucets. I'll add a sorrow or care for the membership of New Covenant Church here in Lincoln that had a major fire this weekend. I'm sorry, that's Rashida and her daughters. Sorrow is not the only thing that brings us together. We also come together in joy. Every week, there are things that we are celebrating. So, what joys are we celebrating this week?
My son Andrew, who ran his 9th half marathon this morning.
Linda's son Andrew on his 9th half marathon this morning. Suzanne and Patrick.
Justice in action.
Justice in action.
And we showed up.
Yeah.
My sister Sharon.
Sharon.
Daughter Aubrey will be 19 on Tuesday.
Aubrey will be 19 on Tuesday.
All who graduate this month.
All who graduate this month. Luke. Amy Miller shares on the live chat a joy that mom has moved to Lincoln. We know also that there are both sorrows and joys that are deeply felt, but not quite ready to be shared yet. So for all of those, we hold a moment of silence together. Our next hymn, and we'll stay seated for this one, is number 396, I Know This Rose Will Open.
Each week, we take up a collection to support the work of this church and our partners in the community. We do this because just as we all grow from our participation in this community, we all give back through our time, our talent, and our treasure. To give, you can text UC Lincoln and the amount to 73256, and the ushers will be taking the collection around. The offering will now be gratefully received. And then we're going to have some guest music again. Goodbyes Are Hard by Lauren Robbins. Goodbyes are hard. So hard, in fact, that many of us skip that step within our relationships. Whether saying goodbye as in see you later, or goodbye as the final step in creating closure in a relationship, we often deny ourselves the opportunity to practice this important human interaction. For many people, goodbyes are uncomfortable. They provide the opportunity to both experience and express the value that the relationship or person has had in our life. This vulnerability, displaying the difficulty we may experience in separating from one another, is a common challenge in a world where many are told to stay strong, avoiding all chances that you might cry, express other emotions, or be perceived as overly sensitive. That's all bogus. The human condition is about experiencing emotions and connecting with others through relationship. Saying goodbye is a cathartic exercise in interpersonal connection and validating the impact people and experiences have on our lives. It's important to honor the footprint others leave on our heart. It's equally important to recognize that not all relationships are meant to be lifelong. Many are time limited. They are established for a specific reason, and when life circumstances shift, as they inevitably do, the relationship no longer serves its previous function. It's okay to let relationships ebb and flow, and let some float away. That doesn't mean they didn't matter. We're continuously evolving. Accordingly, our needs change, and so do the relationships that fulfill those needs. So practice saying goodbye. Do what feels right to express the value that their friendship, their support, or their camaraderie has for you. Allow others to see the impact that their presence has on you. And when it's time to say goodbye, whether just for now or forever, know that in saying goodbye, you're not devaluing the time spent with this person, but saying, you matter, and you've been part of my story. Goodbyes may be hard, but that doesn't mean we should pretend they don't exist. Emotional discomfort often equals emotional growth, something we all need to continually pursue joy and life satisfaction. Our next hymn is 1068 in the Teal hymnal, Rising Green.
My mic, is it on yet? No. Let's turn the mic on. There we go. All right. Now it'll make sense in 15 minutes. There's a carved tree in the hallway of the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. I've walked past it every day for the last 7 years. As I walk from my office here to the sanctuary, the fellowship hall, and back. Earl Kramer handmade it. He's quick to give credit to other members of the congregation, Karen Dean Spear, Linda Ager, for helping with the design. The tree changes over time. Every few months, a plaque goes on one of the leaves with a name and dates. Each name represents a member of the congregation who has died. In the 7 years I've served this church, we've put almost 30 names on that tree. When I first moved to Nebraska in 2017, I remember seeing that tree and I remember admiring the woodwork of it. The craftsmanship, how Earl incorporated a subtle flaming chalice into the branches, the interplay of brass with different colors and textures of wood that make up the leaves. It was and is a beautiful piece of art. Now, when I walk past it though, I find myself stopping a couple times a week, admiring the woodwork but also remembering the names. Bob and Sally Stoddard, who welcomed me to Lincoln. Don Pinkley, who was often right back there and left too soon. Laura Weymouth and her love of art. Each name on that tree is a life distilled down to a little 3x2 brass plaque. A few months ago, I was asked to write a chapter for an upcoming book called Finding Common Ground, a collection of reflections on religious life published by the UK Unitarian Publishing House. The prompt that we were given as we were developing the book has been to think about the intersection of faith, personal experience, and communal life. And so for me, the chapter that I'm writing starts right there with that tree in the hallway, walking back and forth past it over years. Because that tree is where I have learned ministry. Not just the job, they train you pretty well for that in seminary. I'd been around churches for a long time, but for the deeper part, for being embedded in community. I couldn't figure out how to say this next part. I spent a week trying to write this sermon. But a few years ago, my colleague Molly Hausch-Gordon tried to capture the feelings I've been trying to express as I've been writing this sermon for a week. She wrote this poem called On Ministry. They don't tell you, she writes, how beautifully and brutally it aches to serve a community. How you love your people like it is your job. It is. But also the greatest gift of this wondrous calling. How you love them and sit with them and argue with them and hold their hearts in yours. And how they love you too, and you let them, what you let them know of you, and how they argue with you and hold your heart, whether they know it or not. And how you lose them. One by one, to conflict and Sunday morning soccer practice and to death, who just keeps returning to claim the people you love. They don't tell you that this work is just the work of being human together, which is to say the excruciating effort to love with open hands while it all slips through your fingers. To gain and lose and grieve and rejoice, and to do it more rigorously and more constantly than you think you can stand. To witness the miracle of the human heart in the lives of those you serve, but also beating in your own chest. The heart that loses and loses and keeps on loving. You know, of course, they do tell you. They try to warn you, do anything but this if you can. But you can't. Because this ache claimed you long ago, because once you know this terror and wonder, how could you ever choose anything else? That tree. Dozens of those plaques are people who I have loved, who I miss every day. Same with the folks who have moved out of state or who have had other things come up in their lives, or who just don't like me as much as they liked the last guy. That's the job. And it's wonderful and terrible and heartbreaking and joyful all at once, every single day, every week. Everything ends. This is another one of those lessons of religious life that we don't get to avoid. It's one of the lessons of that tree out there for me. Because this is a place where we practice endings over and over again. In a place where we carry memories over and over again. One of the reasons that I often stop at that tree is that I hold some of those memories now. Darwin Blue, in the last couple days of his life, rhapsodizing about trips to New Orleans with Karen. Ada Munson joining the church in her 80s because apparently nobody had asked her to. She had been a part of the church for years, and after I'd been here a couple of years, I noticed that she wasn't on the book, and she said, oh, well, we just never got around to it. Amy Berkey, figuring out Zoom so that she could stay organizing for social justice in the midst of the pandemic right up to the end of her life. If one of the first tasks of congregational ministry is to love the people that you serve, that has come easily to me. What's been harder is the recognition that the longer I serve here, the more names of friends have gone up on that tree. And the fewer other members of the community will have connections to the stories behind some of those names. And this is more complicated right now because I'm in the midst of my own transition. We can just name this thing, right? 2 weeks ago, I accepted a call to serve as the senior minister at Unity Church Unitarian in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'll move up there in July. And so I have these next 2 months in Lincoln to practice saying goodbye well. There are joys and regrets in any major transition, but the hardest one for me is walking past that tree. Because how unfair that there should be one less person in this building who remembers Eileen Durgan Clinchard, or Jeffrey Deal, or Joan Anderson. One of the first invitations I got when I arrived in Lincoln was to come to the landing and have dinner with Joan and with Bob and Sally Stoddard. All of those names of everybody at that dinner are on that tree now. How cruel in any way to contribute to the shift from vital, still living stories to names etched in brass. Roy Oswald wrote a book called Running Through the Thistles almost 50 years ago. And over 2 generations, it's become the text for ministers to read as they leave churches. UU minister and historian Mark Morrison Reed summarized the central image of the book like this. Roy recounts that when he was a young boy growing up in rural Saskatchewan, the quickest way home from school was over the fields. It was shorter, he writes, but occasionally we would come upon enormous thistle patches. He and his older brothers would either have to run around or find the narrowest gap and sprint across. He writes, "I can still vividly remember the experience, running full speed in bare feet across 20 feet of prickly thistles, yelping in pain all the way through. At the end, there was always a few thistles stuck in his feet, but the ordeal was over." This, Oswald claims, is how many of us manage our departure from a congregation. We deal with our farewells by steeling ourselves, then plunging in. We know it's going to hurt, so we rush full tilt ahead, hoping to get it over with. The quickest burst of speed, this is Mark Morrison Reed, the quickest burst of speed I've seen was a colleague who announced his resignation on the way out the door to General Assembly, which happens the second week of June, and had left both his congregation and his fiancée by the end of the month. This is how we want to do it sometimes. Just get the thing over with, not the fiancé part. Get the thing over with, dive in, right? Get through, plan what comes next, move on. But Oswald's advice is to not do that. To take the time to practice saying goodbye well. The UU Ministers Association has professional ethics guidelines around departing ministers. Right. After I leave at the end of June, I won't have formal contact with this congregation for a couple years. The reason for that is to let the next ministry flourish, to give space for whoever that is to really root in with this congregation. So there is a real goodbye coming in 2 months. But the invitation from Oswald and others is to take this time to practice saying goodbye, to celebrate what we've done together, to name what we've left undone, to appreciate each other, and then to let go, to wish each other well. That's the project of the next 2 months. That's a couple months of sermons for me. In order for ministers to say goodbye well, Oswald writes, our humanness should stand out more predominantly than our clerginess. In our call to wholeness, we have been called to be fully human. Nothing more, nothing less. So, until the last Sunday in June, that's my job. To say goodbye and not pretend that it's simple. To just be human in the midst of all this. To be more human than clergy. So, here's a start. I know, because there were listening sessions and there were notes, that there's a lot of questions and guesses why Stacy and I are leaving Lincoln right now. But I'll say life doesn't lend itself well to simple narratives. It doesn't lend itself well to a single answer. So as briefly as I can, here are a couple of the things that went into the last few months of discernment for me. My wife Stacy and I have aging parents in 3 separate states right now. In New York, in Maryland, and in Florida. St. Paul, Minnesota is a Delta hub. We can get easily to all 3 of those locations. Rob and Jan Eller-Isaacs were friends of mine. They were mentors of mine in ministry. They served as the ministers of Unity for 20 years. They both retired in 2001. They both have since died. And so the congregation up there has had a really complicated couple years and is mourning the loss of people who served them well and faithfully for decades. And I would not be truthful if I didn't say I feel called to some of that work with that congregation, both for them and as a way to honor Rob and Jan, my friends. 2 things. The list goes on. Finances at this congregation are hard right now. This is not the whole story. This is part of the story. We had to cut hours this year, including a furlough for me. Let me tell you, it has not been great to announce my departure on March 31st and then be gone for a month and now come back now. But part of the discernment over the last couple months has been that it might be easier to get an interim minister up to full-time than to bring my position back up to full-time. We've also done a lot of what we set out to do in Lincoln. 7 years ago, we were talking about a couple things. One, that we wanted the Unitarian Church of Lincoln to be known in the broader community. Two, that we wanted to build partnerships in the world. So let me just talk for a minute about what this week looked like. Congregation's been recovering from the disruption of the pandemic. We have lots of visitors coming in the doors. And we did this thing called Justice in Action. So we're gonna talk about that for a second. So Justice in Action is a coalition of 24 congregations that we helped found, that this church helped found. And on Thursday night, we had 1,200 people gathered for the annual Nehemiah Assembly. It is the biggest interfaith gathering in the history of Lincoln, Nebraska, working for justice. And within that biggest interfaith gathering in Lincoln, Nebraska, there were a whole hell of a lot of Unitarians. All right, so some of you have seen this number on Facebook. If you have, don't say anything, but if you've seen the number on how many Unitarians were there, raise your hand for a second. Okay, don't answer these following questions. Justice in Action is part of the DART network, the Direct Action Research and Training Network. DART says that at your Nehemiah Action, most churches should have a stretch goal to get the average Sunday attendance for their church out to the Nehemiah Action. That's the turnout goal. Our average Sunday attendance at this church in 2023 was about 85 people. In 2023, last year, we brought 123 people to the Nehemiah, 124 people to the Nehemiah Assembly. So we overreached. This year, when the organizers of Justice in Action said, how many people do you think you can turn out? We looked at each other and went, well, let's say 150. Let's just try and do that. How many people did we turn out? Any guesses from people who haven't already seen this on Facebook? No. The Unitarian Church of Lincoln brought 167 people out on Thursday. Which makes us the single largest contingent of people at that event. There were more Unitarians than representatives of any other church. There are some churches in that room that are a lot bigger than ours. We're going to talk more about that. There were more people from the Unitarian Church than there were from St. Mark's, who was hosting the event. If you were there, you can probably infer the size of St. Mark's congregation by the fact that they were the hosts. So that was one of the things that we said we wanted to do 7 years ago. And this feels like a moment where it's not done, there's more to do. But we're at a moment where I can hand off to somebody else. There's also stuff left undone, of course there is, right? That mostly predates the pandemic, and a ministerial transition allows for some necessary reinvention. The last couple of years have also been a time when we've built up some relationships with the UUA through the pandemic, connections after the pandemic, our land acknowledgement work. There are healthier connections to the Unitarian Universalist Association than there were 7 years ago. And that's important because that's a big part of ministerial transition. And here's a brief educational piece that's really important, because we say these acronyms, but they have an important aspect to them. My responsibility and accountability right now is primarily through the UUMA, the UU Ministers Association. The Unitarian Universalist Association, the UUA, is what is the primary support for congregations in this process. Here's why that's important. Every single congregation that's been in transition, and I've been a transition coach now for a couple years, so I've worked with lots of congregations going through this, other than Lincoln. Every congregation feels like the UUA is driving the bus on transitions, and the UUA is imposing something that benefits ministers on congregations, right? Can we just acknowledge that this is a thing that's out in the air? Okay. Unitarian Universalism is relatively unusual in that the ministers actually are not represented by the UUA. We are a wholly independent thing. The UUMA is not a part of the Unitarian Universalist Ministers of the Unitarian Universalist Association. So all of the people at the UUA who are working with this congregation, Sharon Dittmar, Christine Purcell, the whole transitions office, they are working in the best interests of the congregation. Not in the best interests of me, not in the best interests of any potential interim minister. Their fiduciary duty is to the congregation. That's important to say a lot because it's easy to sort of get twisted in the process. Ministers have our own thing. We've got people watching out for us. But the UUA is for congregations. Okay. So those are some of the reasons. It's obviously more complicated. We'll talk more. We've got 2 months. We'll talk until we're tired of talking. That's the way this goes. But the other thing that I hope you hear from me today and in this next 2 months, more than any of that, is that it was not, is not, and will not be an easy choice to leave. Hear me when I say that. This is the congregation that ordained me, where we've brought our child into the world, where we together have built things that will outlast any one of us, any combination of us's in this room. This is a special, special place. So of course I'm excited about what the next step is, right? I have to be honest about that part. It's a big deal professionally and personally, and I hope in parting you can wish me well in that. But it's also hard and complicated to leave. So that's where I'm going to be for the next 2 months, sitting in the humanness of that. Planning to preach a few sermons that I might have been worried about whether or not I could get away with in previous years. Pentecost is coming up. Pentecost is coming up. But I'm also hoping we can celebrate what we've done together and spend as much time one-on-one with members of the congregation as I possibly can. And then at the end of June, I'll take my leave. But I'll do it remembering the words we used on Thursday night, all 1,200 of us gathered at the Justice in Action Assembly. Blessed is the work of compassion and justice that unites us. We leave this gathering renewed by the strength and vision that has been shared. The journey is not always easy, and the end will not be ours to complete. We build the way to justice as we walk and work together. The journey is not always easy, and the end will not be ours to complete. I didn't write that. I think a member of this congregation wrote that while I was on sabbatical.
Allison was part of that team.
Yeah. That was a hard line for me to read the other night with 1,200 people there. but also a really comforting line for me to read the other night with 1,200 people there. Because that's how it works. That's how it's always worked, how it will work. Because the foundation of the church is generations building on each other, remembering what has been, and imagining what might yet be. May it always be so, and amen. We have one more piece of guest music. As we reach the end of our time together, we extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us until we are together again. Our closing hymn is number 6 in the gray hymnal, Just as Long as I Have Breath. Would you please rise in body or in spirit and join me in singing? That is the end of our service.